Hello, everyone. Mr. Evert here. I hope you guys are all having a fantastic day so far. We wanted to come at you today with a quick video lesson about the River Valley civilizations, as you guys can see on the title here on your screen. And as we talk about the River Valley civilizations, we're actually going to cover a couple of different things. One, we're going to talk about a transition that happens, and this is a really important transition in history from what we call the prehistoric period to the historic period. And we're going to talk about what moves us from one period to another. And that's one of those really monumental, important events in history. Then we're going to talk about the River Valley civilizations, why they were called the River Valley civilizations, and what they had in common with one another. And then finally, we're going to take a look at Mesopotamia. We're going to look at this early civilization. It is one of the earliest that we have record of, and we'll talk about why Mesopotamia was referred to as the cradle of civilization. And we're going to be getting into Mesopotamia over the next couple of days, and we're going to be talking about some of the city-states and kingdoms that existed within Mesopotamia before its fall. So I'm not going to spend too much time there, but I do want to go over an overview with you and just kind of preview the information that we're going to be getting into in the next couple of days. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, the first thing we need to look at is that transition which occurs between the prehistoric and the historic period. And man, is this important. So much going on here. So we think that around 6,000 years ago, that there were some Neolithic villages, and this is during the tail end of the New Stone Age. We're coming to the end of that age. Became cities. People began to gather together and live in large groups as a result of agricultural and commercial prosperity. And so as people were able to find these areas where crops grew well and they began to settle there, they're able to farm, they're able to produce more and more crops. And as more people can then develop their own individual job skills, we talked about job specialization with the 8 features of civilization, then people began to branch out and they began to discover that they can work metal or that they can harvest wool and they can produce these goods that other civilizations would want, and they begin to trade with them. That leads to economic prosperity. So these cities are growing, they're becoming more and more prosperous, and more people are beginning to live there. And then this happens, and this is what completely turns things around, and it moves us from the prehistoric period into the historic period. Along the way, they invented writing. And this revolutionized the world because before, during the prehistoric period, we base all of our knowledge on the things that we found. We base them on tools that were discovered, those stone tools that archaeologists have discovered, on cave paintings and cave art that we've discovered. We discovered dwellings and remnants of dwellings. And that allows us to make very educated guesses about how the people lived. But once people started writing things down, we now have details. We now have facts that we know that we can study and we can go back to. We know the names of kings. We know specific events in history like battles and wars that were fought. We know what laws were written down. We have records of harvest and events like droughts and natural events like eclipses that occurred. All of those things are recorded in history, and we can now go back and look at them and we can study those events and learn from them. So the development of writing is one of those crucial moments in history that radically changed the world. It doesn't seem like a big deal to us now, but man, oh man, did it have an impact during that time period and moving forward for us to be able to study the events that took place. All right, so let's talk about those River Valley civilizations. The first civilizations to develop came to be along the banks of rivers, and that's why we call them River Valley civilizations. The abundance of fresh water, and especially along the banks of a river, was essential. When we look at geography and we look at the way that we use our resources, if you don't have access to fresh water, then you can't build a civilization, you can't build a city in that area. Water has to be available for a number of different reasons. First and foremost, we have to have water just to survive. I mean, potable water is essential. If you don't have drinking water, then you're only going to survive for just a few days before you die of dehydration. In addition to that, for farmers, Farmers have to have an abundant supply of fresh water for their crops to grow. You need fresh water for transporting goods, that ability to travel up and down river to transport goods, the abundance of food with fish. There are so many reasons why rivers are important. When we look at these societies and civilizations that developed, we see Mesopotamia develop between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. We're going to look at that in more detail on a map in just a moment. We see Egypt developed along the banks of the Nile River, which is in northern Africa. We see India develop along the Indus River Valley. And then China develops along the Huangshe and the Yangtze River valleys. And we're going to look at each one of these civilizations in detail, but we're going to focus right now on Mesopotamia and on an area called the Fertile Crescent. Okay. And we'll look at these on the map right quick, and I'll try to show you on the map. Pardon my camera bumbling around here as I grab my stylus tool. Okay. But as we look at the map, I'm going to start on the western side of things, and we'll take a look at Egypt, which develops right here along the Nile River. You guys can see that on your map. And then Mesopotamia, which we're going to talk about in detail here in just a minute, shows up right here to the north of the Persian Gulf. We have two rivers that flow around Mesopotamia. You have the Tigris River to the north and the Euphrates River to the south. And then in northern India, between India and Pakistan, we have this crescent of land, which is called the Indus River Valley. Okay. And then to the far east, you have the Huangshe River, which flows out to the Pacific Ocean. And that's where China develops. Okay. All right, guys, I'm going to erase my marks and we're going to go ahead and move forward here. All right, sorry about that. All right, here we go. Next up. All right, so let's talk about Mesopotamia. Okay, Mesopotamia is an area which is located between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. It actually means the land between the rivers. And this is really cool. I'm kind of a word nerd here, so I'm going to break it down for you. Meso is a prefix which means in the middle of or between. Okay. And the word I threw out the word potable just a minute ago when we talked about water, and that means water that you can drink. But the word pot actually means water. So when you take meso and add it to pot, you have the land between the water. Okay, so you have the Tigris Euphrates, or the Tigris River to the north, the Euphrates River to the south, and Mesopotamia is kind of nestled right between those two. Okay, Mesopotamia began as an urban society in southern Iraq around 5000 BC. Now that's roughly 7,000 years ago. And the end of Mesopotamia, when the civilization fell, happened around the 6th century BC, which means about 600 years before year zero, if you're looking at a timeline. So again, that's roughly 2,600 years ago that Mesopotamia as a civilization crumbled and it ceased to exist. Okay. All right. What you're looking at on the map here is called the Fertile Crescent. And this is a very important part of land. We're going to look at several civilizations that formed along the Fertile Crescent. But what you guys need to see here on the map, and I'm going to change my pen color here to make it stand out a little bit more, is this area right here between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. That area is where Mesopotamia developed. And you can see some cities like Nineveh and Assar. You have Akkad and Assyria, Babylon, Uruk, Sumer, the city of Ur. All of these, all down the length of the rivers here, that is Mesopotamia, and that's where the land developed. This is the earliest civilization that we know of. Okay, give me just a moment to erase again. And I want to point out a few other things that exist within the Fertile Crescent and other areas that we're going to look at. All right, there we go. All right, so other areas that we're going to take a look at as we study and as we move forward. You can see Phoenicia over here. Phoenicia is an important civilization. We get our alphabet from Phoenicia, and we're going to talk about how the Phoenicians played a role in actually several early civilizations that they traded with and they had encounters with. Below Phoenicia, you have the civilization of Israel. Right down here, you can see Jericho, Palestine, the Dead Sea. all of those areas we're going to talk about a little bit later on as well. All right, let me erase, and we're going to move forward to the Fertile Crescent. As I'm erasing, I'll try to multitask here. The Fertile Crescent is a very, very important geographical area as we talk about the development of civilization. All right. Get back to my map. We'll move forward. All right, let's talk about the impact of geography. We've only got a few slides to go here before we wrap this up. All right, the two rivers form the basis for which the wealth of the region was built on. Without the Tigris and the Euphrates River, Mesopotamia would not have been able to exist. And the reason for that is in the next bullet. There is not an abundant supply of water or a regular supply of water in Mesopotamia. It does not rain frequently there. So without the rivers, you can't have a civilization. It provides water. And not only does it provide water, take a look at this word right here. Okay, this one's important. The river also provides silt. Okay, now the rivers start in the highlands above Mesopotamia and they flow down into the south, into these valleys. Okay, and again, they're called river valley civilizations. And as the river flows, it picks up dirt and debris that washes into the river as a part of the erosion process. Rains fall, it washes dirt down into the river, and then the river carries that dirt and that sediment downstream until the river's flow slows down enough for that dirt and sediment to be deposited on the banks. And we call that silt. The silt is incredibly fertile. It's good land for growing crops. It's rich in minerals. It's rich in resources. There's a lot of carbon in it. And it functions as fertilizer. Crops just grow really well in an environment of silt. So between these two rivers, there are just layers of silt that are deposited over time. And it creates this wonderful farmland for the Mesopotamians to use to grow crops. All right, let's continue to talk about the impact of geography. The valley between the Tigris and Euphrates River is called Mesopotamia, which we talked about just a minute ago. Literally means between the rivers in Greek. Those are Greek prefixes and root words there. An arc of land from the Mesopotamian Sea, or the Mediterranean Sea. Pardon my mistake there. An arc of land from the Mediterranean Sea to the Persian Gulf is called the Fertile Crescent. That's the map we looked at just a minute ago. That has Phoenicia and Israel and Mesopotamia all located on the map. Is an area with very rich soil, abundant crops grow there. It is an area where a lot of early civilizations are formed. All right. Ancient Mesopotamia consists of Sumer, Babylon, Assyria, Acadia, and then finally Persia. Persia is the final empire in Mesopotamia before we see that civilization crumble. All right, and this is going to be the last of our slides that we take a look at today. We're going to kind of wrap things up after this. The three main independent cities in southern Mesopotamia were Eridu, and Uruk. These cities had a political and economic advantage over surrounding countryside. And so as we look at these cities, these are cities that can be easily fortified and defensible. They're able to grow crops in abundance. They are successful as cities, and that allows them to be prosperous. And I fibbed with you guys a minute ago. We're going to go just another slide or two further because I want to talk about economy right quick because there's one major invention that the Mesopotamians have that I want to hit before we leave off on this video. All right, we need to talk about economy right quick. Sumerian city-states, and that's how Mesopotamia is kind of broken down into regions or small governable areas, were based on farming and trade. Industry is an important factor in civilization as well. In other words, it's not just farming. They're producing things that they could later trade with other civilizations. The people of Mesopotamia were known for metalwork. They were known for woolen textiles. They did raise a lot of sheep, and they were known for their pottery. The things that they didn't have, though, were things like copper, tin, and timber. They didn't grow a lot of trees in Mesopotamia. So they had to trade for these things with other civilizations. These were imported goods, and they exchanged things like dried fish and wool and wheat and metal goods in order to get the things that they did not have. All right, and here's the big one. This is what we're going to leave off on because this is one of the most monumental inventions of all time. And it came about in Mesopotamia around 5,000 years ago. So let's take a look at this. Around 3000 BC, which again is about 5,000 years ago, the invention of the wheel was created, making transportation of goods easier and quicker. Now, this is one of those moments in history where an invention has just radically impacted our civilization. And not only civilization then, but we're still using this thing today. If you think about ancient Mesopotamia before the wheel, people are having to carry things around on their backs and on their shoulders. If you can imagine carrying 100-pound sacks of grain or these giant wooden logs on your shoulder and trying to get them from one place to another, how difficult that would be, how time consuming. You could only move just a few things each day and it would wear you out and you would have health problems because of it. But then all of a sudden, someone comes up with this great idea. Let's make something round that will roll. And then if you attach it to a cart, you can attach it to an animal. And all of a sudden, you can move massive objects and extremely heavy objects. And it requires very little effort on your part. The wheel is doing all the work for you. And that was an invention 5,000 years ago. And it's one that, again, we still use to this day. You think about all the things that we use that have a wheel on them. The car wouldn't be possible without the wheel. The bicycle wouldn't be possible without the wheel. If you enjoy skateboarding or roller skating, you've got to have wheels on those things for it to be able to do what it's meant to do. So the Mesopotamians just radically impacted the world when they created the wheel. Such an incredible invention and new piece of technology that allows life to be just a little bit easier than it was before. It makes things less complicated. All right, so we're going to wrap up with that. And I hope that this video has helped you guys in giving you an overview of Mesopotamia, getting us ready to jump into looking at the kingdoms of Sumer and Acadia and Babylon and Persia. And we're going to get into all those things here over the next couple of days. And I look forward to covering them with you. Hope that you guys have enjoyed this and you've learned something from it. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.